day everyone, I'm Miles Manala and I will now discuss the Chapter 3, which is the Organizational Learning Motivation and Performance. So at the end of this chapter, the learners is expected to know these following objectives. So first is the understand the nature of learning and organizational learning. Second is the recognize the preconditions for learning for both trainers and trainees. Thirdly is determine the issues that must be addressed to best arrange a training environment. Next is distinguish the factors that influence the motivation to learn. Next is correlate the social learning theory to training. And lastly is value the important implications for training of the adult learning theory. So let us know first what is learning organization. So ang learning organization is not just a management fad. It signifies a strategic move and orientation on how organizations learn that can make an organization competitive and effective. So in order to survive and develop, organization must have the capacity to learn and change willfully, constantly, and speedily. Therefore, organization must transform themselves into a learning organization. So now, let's explore more about understanding learning and organizational learning. So learning as a process of obtaining knowledge and skills that engage in one's change of behavior. So it is the outcome of experiences that allows an individual to show newly obtained behavior. It happens when a person experiences a new manner of acting, thinking, or feeling and finds new pattern useful and integrates it into the collection of behaviors. So when a behavior has been learned, it can be considered already as a skills. So ang learning is makaklasssified into general groups. So first is the verbal information. So ano nga ba ang verbal information? So ang verbal information ay yung mga facts, knowledge, principles of information. So tinatawag din itong declarative knowledge. And next is intellectual skills. So ang intellectual skills is the concept, rules, and procedure that govern many activities in people's daily lives, like driving a car or shopping in the supermarket. So it's also known as procedural knowledge. Next is the cognitive skills. So, ang cognitive skills is the application of information and techniques and understanding how and when to use knowledge and information. Next is the motor skills. So, ang motor skills is the synchronization and carrying out of physical movements that entails the use of muscles like learning how to swim. And lastly is the attitudes. So, it is the preferences and internal state links with one's beliefs and feelings. Attitudes are learned and it can be changed. So, they are regarded as the most complicated to win over through training. Let's move on to organizational learning. So, organizational learning is the process of creating, sharing, diffusing, and applying knowledge. So, the focus of organizational learning is on the system that used to create and distribute new knowledge on a organization-wide basis. Therefore, it is a dynamic process of creating and sharing knowledge. So, the training goals that centers on developing and improving employees' knowledge, skills, and abilities, which is the KSA, has been from the oldest school of learning. Certainly, organization learning cannot be attained through individual employee learning. So, in designing a training program in which learning is utilized, trainers must assess the basic principles of how individual learns. So, both for the design and training programs and materials, learning principle must be evaluated and integrated. Trainers should design also the training program to meet the needs of adult learners who are capable of self-direction and enjoy experiential learning techniques to be employed as direct application to their work situation. So, this designing training program for organizational learning follows the learning cycle. So, ano nga ba ang learning cycle? So, ang learning cycle is a continuous process which consists of following elements, which are the first is identification of learning needs. Next is learning design. Next is delivery of training program. Papunta sa learning evaluation. So let us explain well what is identification of learning needs. So identification of learning needs is the process by which the organization and individual systematically investigate current and future learning requirements in relation to the operating environment. So next is the learning design. So the development of an intervention, training, job rotation, etc. to address identified learning needs. And next is the delivery of learning program. So dito sa learning programs is ito yung implementation of learning or yung mga interventions at individual, group, or organizational levels. And lastly is the learning and evaluation. So, without evaluation of organization is hindi nila malalaman if the investment in learning has been the desired result or kung effective ba or naabot ba yung mga kailangan nilang result or outcome. Condition of learning. Prior to placement on any training programs, learners must be ready to learn. So, trainees must be trainable. That is the key to have the ability to learn and are motivated to learn. So, to have the ability to learn, trainees must acquire the knowledge and skills requisite to mastering the material. So, ibig sabihin, ang trainers ay dapat well-oriented and the motivation ay kailangang meron sila and dun makikita ang compassionate ba sila as a trainees. So, next is a way to assess motivation to learn is inspect how involved trainees are in their own jobs and career planning. So, it assumes that highly involved individuals will have higher motivation to learn. So, trainees must know beforehand the value of training program. They will participate in to guarantee the learning of behavior and use them on their jobs. So, may mga benefits din ito like incentive could strengthen their motivation to learn and the behavior, practice them and remember them as well. And next is the condition of the learning environment. So, it is the responsibility of trainers to create training atmosphere conducive to maximize learning in order to accomplish this responsibility. So, trainers must decide on how to best arrange your training environment through addressing the following issues. So, these issues is first is the whole versus part learning. So, what is whole versus part learning? Trainees must learn each part separately, from the simplest to the most difficult, but they must be shown the whole performance so that they know what is their final goal is. Next is the mass versus space practice. So, space practice, so it is the practicing the new behavior and taking rest periods in between. So, it's more effective than mass practice. So, practicing new behavior without breaks, especially for motor skills, space practice is also more productive for long-term retention and for transfer of learning to work setting than mass practice. Next is overlearning. So, what is overlearning? Overlearning is a process far beyond the point of performing the task successfully, which is vital in both acquisition and transfer of knowledge and skills. However, it increased retention, makes the behavior for automatic, and helps trainers transfer what they have learned back up to the job setting. So, overlearning is important for driving or flying skills so that in time for crisis, the individual can remember quickly what action should be taken. And next is the goal setting. So, goal setting says that this can aid employees improve their performance by directing their attention to particular behavior that requires to change specific and challenging goals challenge individuals to reach higher level of performance. And next is knowledge of results. So, in order for trainers to improve their performance, that they need timely and specific knowledge of results feedback, which serves both informal and motivation. And next is the attention. So, attention is the training programs and materials must be designed by trainers to make certain that trainers will focus their attention to them. To seek attention, training environment must be comfortable to trainees with good temperature, lighting, seats, plenty of rooms, and snacks, and free from distractions, such as phone call, interruptions from colleagues. So it will be difficult for trainees to learn if the environment is not comfortable, even if the trainers are highly motivated. Trainers can also be translate learning objectives into related job issues to catch more attention for trainees. Next is the retention. So retention is the ability is relevant to effectiveness of training program. If material presented is easy to understand and remember, there will be more retention on the part of the trainees. So methods to ensure retention includes presenting the overall picture of what is to be learned, using example concepts and terms familiar to trainees. Next is organize materials from simple to difficult. Periodically make recall through test. Next is ensuring employees' motivation for learning. So, motivation to learn is the aspiration to learn. The content of the training program, the desires consists of having the vigor to learn, directing that vigor toward learning and exerting effort to learn even when challenged with difficulties. May mga factors that influence motivation to learn, which is a places pleasure and the mastery of all types training, content like knowledge, behavior, and skills. So, managers need to make certain that employees' motivation to learn is always peak. They can do this by making sure employees' self-efficacy, considering the benefits of training, being aware of training needs, career, interests, and goals, comprehending working environment, characteristic, ensuring employees' basic skills level. And next, let's move on social learning theory and training. So according to Albert Bandura and his associates, developed the social learning theory, a model of learning. So one of the theories very essential contribution to science of learning is revealing that learning could happen exclusively of obvious behavior by the learner. So that is the learner does not have to do anything but observe what is going on around him. So no behavior pattern is produced and reinforced given. So the essential principle of social learning theory is that events and consequences in learning situation are cognitively sorted out before they are learned, so or influence behavior. So the sorting out of information directs the learning and transformation in behavior. Therefore, a person can learn by observing the behavior of others and consequences that results. So next is cognitive processes that are a part of social learning. So, theory are motivated attention, retention, and behavioral reproduction. So, first, what is motivation? So, the model points out motivation both influences and influenced by the other processes. The learner's needs establish what things receive attention and process for attention. So, social learning theory integrates that the operant conditioning concept of behavioral consequences affecting likelihood of future behavior. Social learning theory proposes that behavioral consequences can obtain through anticipatory learning. So, anticipatory learning transpires when a person learns what consequences are connected with the behavior or set of behaviors without actually engaging in the behavior and receiving the consequences. So, it is often referred as a theory of observational or vicarious learning. It is combines with cognitive and behaviorist concept into comprehensive set of integrated processes that are applicable to all types of learning. So providing another set of tools for designing and implementing training. So what is attention? Attention is the learning process begins with all the learners' attention becoming all ears on particular objects and events in the environment. So, or simply stimuli, or a great multitude of objects and events in typical environment. People pay attention only to some. So the things people pay attention to are those that stand out for some reason. which is loud, bright, unusual, and etc. So, or those that people are learn important example is lead to need satisfaction. So, this reaction is reflected in fact that individuals are more likely to model the behavior of someone who is a spotlighted in some way, highly publicized, usually attractive, popular, and etc., than of some who is not. So the concept of attention is important in training. So learning is enhanced by making input learning points stand out so that the trainees will focus attention on them. So, dapat alisin yung mga nakakasagabal na objects such as cell phones, beepers, keep trainees from becoming preoccupied during training, making learning exercises fun and interesting keeps attention focused on the learning topic. However, exercises that is fun but do not relate to the learning objectives draw attentions away from what trainees are expected to learn, making the trainees less effective. Next naman is yung retention. So, when attention is focused on an object or event, the arriving information is sorted out for possible retention. Some of information will be retained and some will be gone. So, the training is planned to be facilitate the retention processes, the more learning will take place. So, may preliminary phases of retention. So, it is the conversion of the information into symbol significance to the individual or a process called symbolic coding. So, what is symbolic coding? So, symbolic coding typically takes the structure of folding the external objects and events in internal images and verbal symbols. So, these symbols are then prearranged into the existing cognitive structure and the occurs of associations with formally stored information. In order to help the retention process, the learner must practice the learned material to symbolic rehearsal, which entails imagining how the knowledge or skills will be employed. So, on the contrary of storing information with just memorizing and without relations with personal applications, usually results in merely short-term retention. So, example is those students who have always forced themselves to memorize for an exam are possibly familiar with this experience. Hence, liking information with its application increases the storage and retrieval practice, so the symbolic rehearsal practice can be considered as a mental procedure. Move on behavioral reproduction. So, what is behavioral reproduction? So, behavioral reproduction is repeated practice. The more the person performs using latest information, the more it is trained and preserved. So, the usefulness of practice relies on how the practice is planned and highlighted. So, the behavioral reproduction is a process, is a function of both the learner's cognitive processes and the external environment. So, this twofold reality reveals that the person's cognitive processes brings about the behavior that a person must regain the appropriate behavior from storage and instruct the body to execute the fitting actions. Then the behavior itself truly occurs in and happens to be part of the environment. So, it is significant to remember also that if the consequences are to shape behavior, the individuals must be conscious of these consequences. Valuable training programs are required to produce desirable consequences of learning and focusing the learning back on the workforce. So, next is the adult learning theory. Throughout their lives, people experience different learning environment. As a toddler, learning consists of what, when, and how to learn. So, in the future, this learning is expected to be utilized. Knowledge and work-related experiences that they take with them in the training program. Adults too wanted to know the rationale of learning something. So, the practical use of what they are learning and its bearing to their problems and concerns. Adults are too self-directed and problem-centered in their manner of learning. So, they are fond of learning independently, They are also motivated by both instinct and extrinsing factors. So these dissimilarities between the child and an adult in terms of learning paved the way to the development of andragogy, coined by Malcolm Knowles. Andragogy is an adult-oriented approach to learning that considers the difference between adult and child learners. So andragogy engage in making the learning experiences of adults who are self-directed and problem-centered and consider the learner's existing knowledge and experiences. On the contrary, pedagogy refers to the traditional approach of learning used to educate children and youth. Adult learning theory has important implications for training and every steps of training procedure. The trainer and trainee should be mutually responsible for the design and structure of training programs. Below are the implications of adult learning theory for training. So first is the adults need to know the rationale for training. Next is adults must have some into the planning and instructions of training programs. Thirdly is adults should participate in the needs analysis and contribution like training content and methods. Fourthly is the designers of the training programs must needs and interests in the trainees. Fifth is training content must be meaningful and useful to trainers. Work-related needs and problems. Next is trainers must be conscious of trainees' experience and utilize them in examples. Next is adults can learn independently and may decide to do so. Next is adults are motivated by both intrinsic and extrinsic reward. And lastly, adults must be given safe practice opportunities. So, now, in the succeeding part of my discussion, we will be tackle these following important terminologies. Andragogy engage in making the learning experiences of adults who are self-directed and problem-centered and considers the learner's existing knowledge and experiences. So, anticipatory learning transpires when a person learns what consequences are connected with a behavior or set of behaviors without actually engaging in the behavior and receiving the consequences. So next is motivation is the combination of an individual's aspiration and vigor aimed at accomplishing a goal. Motivation to learn is the aspiration to learn the content of the training program. So organizational learning is a process of creating, sharing, diffusing, and applying knowledge. So next is pedagogy. Pedagogy refers to the traditional approach of learning used to educate children and youth. Social learning. Social learning theory emphasizes the importance of observing and modeling the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions of others. Next is symbolic coding. Symbolic coding typically takes the structure of following the external objects and events to internal images and verbal symbols. And that's all. Thank you.